I think it's now time for you guys to ask some questions. So just raise your hand if you'd like to be called on. You in the front row?
Hi, good evening.
Please wait for the microphone. Thanks.
Hello, good evening. Just picking up on the reparations point, I wonder whether you think it would be most effective to do that on a national basis or perhaps an international one.
I think that first we have to get to the acknowledgement, and then second, I think that as the proposal in the United States Congress by Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, following Congressman John Conyers, is have a commission to study that, to see how it is done. I think automatically people defensively say, oh, you're talking about writing everybody a check. I think that it has to be thought out, but those that have been the scholars and the proponents of it need to be part of those commissions. But I think the first thing is that you have to, as Randall Robertson wrote years ago, acknowledge the debt, and then we can deal with how the debt is to be paid. But we're just getting to the point in some places in the world where the debt is even acknowledged.
Thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else?
One of you mentioned 3 weeks ago was the National Action Network convention, and one of the people who spoke there, who wasn't a presidential candidate, was Alexandria OcasioCortez. Do you see AOC and some other Congress people in her cohort, like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, as kind of the future of the Democratic Party in being able to marry a very explicit and distinct articulation of what identity politics is, as well as a kind of more classically leftist-based politics?
I think that they have the potential to do that, yes. I think that they've been very distinct and very bold in coming out with their positions, which has shifted the first part of this congressional class, let's put it that way. Can they sustain it? Will they be targeted to try to be removed? And I've talked to Alexandria about this. My concern is that every 10 years in the United States, they have the census. They use the census to redraw congressional districts. Do people try to draw their lines and defeat them? So you have to build a real movement that protects the voices of every generation that's going to move forward. And I think they understand the weight of it. I think that's why they're criticized. And I think that they have to be as strategic as they are bold in terms of their statements.
Thanks.
Hi, Al. I think I first came across you in the Louis Frew documentary you did, I think like about 20 years ago now.
In the what?
Louis Frew documentary.
Okay, I don't remember, but go ahead.
There was a BBC documentary about 20 years ago that you were a part of. But if you don't remember then, I don't know if it's worth asking the question.
Go ahead, maybe I'll remember it as you go.
Yeah, because like kind of, it went around kind of Harlem and New York, and I was just going to ask you kind of, have the problems of kind of like the late 90s in kind of Harlem and New York, are they kind of still there today, and how has that kind of area changed, and kind of what was the experience of kind of making that documentary about there then?
About the experiences in New York in the 90s.
Yeah, because it was kind of like a big kind of point of the documentary was kind of like conditions like Harlem and New York.
Okay, well, I think I know what you're talking about. It was around, it was in the 90s. That's about 30 years ago. I've been here a long time. I think that the conditions are some ways changed, in some ways the same. I think they've changed in the sense that we have gotten incremental advances with political power and then slapped back. For example, in the 90s, I would have never imagined in my lifetime I'd see a black president. But before I celebrate too much, he was succeeded by Donald Trump. there are advances that we've seen in terms of people breaking through in the culture. I remember in the 90s, Spike Lee and the whole rap world was Russell Simmons and all, we all around the same age grew up together. We never thought we'd be mainstream, considered mainstream credible. But at the same time, the conditions in those communities, though they may be incrementally better, they are still, in terms of compared to the mainstream world, the same racial gap. And now it's compounded with gentrification, where different communities are being just totally moved out. People are being brought in with a higher income. And the whole color and stability of the communities are different, and you're pushing people to the pocket, to other pockets. So I think that in many ways, the optics are better, and some of the substance incrementally better. But I think that in terms of the general societal way that you measure things, there has not been much difference.
You brought up gentrification. So one of the big debates in New York recently has been about Amazon's new headquarters, them being rescinded. What are your views on how that should have been handled differently by city officials?
I think that they should have sat with the people in that area, and it should have been a bottom-up evolved partnership if they were going to bring any corporation, not just Amazon, in, rather than impose from the top down. And I think that was the protest that people said, you can't just drop a big company in here, give it a tax break, and not deal with the indigenous population.
Interesting. Anyone else? You in the back.
You mentioned that you couldn't celebrate for long after Trump came into the presidency after Obama. What would you say, to what extent is Obama's presidency, and what does it reflect? And to what extent is it a strong reflection of the social and political position of black Americans, or then and continuing now? And to what extent do you think that it could be possibly a false indicator of a progression made?
I think that Barack Obama did several things against great opposition that led to some significant moves. The Affordable Care Act brought in 23 million Americans that never had health insurance, disproportionately black, that for 60 years they were trying to get a health care bill, couldn't do it. And when you're dealing in a community that disproportionately has pre-existing conditions, disproportionately have kids that are home that are not insured, that bill kept their insurance till they was 26, that was a big deal. I think when he fought to uphold voting rights, his Justice Department actively going into Texas, North Carolina, and other places where they were raising these suppressive voter laws and actively fighting them was important because it really saved some elections. And when you look at the whole question of police brutality, we were at the table with Obama dealing with Ferguson, dealing with Chicago, and his Justice Department put some of those cities under consent decrees, which means they could not operate, the police departments that had a pattern of abuse, they could not operate on their own. They had to operate through Eric Holder or Loretta Lynch, who became the Attorney Generals. Those three things alone had never happened in American history. And the reason that, you know, from my vantage point, they were important is they were the things that Donald Trump immediately stopped. They immediately took back consent decrees. They immediately went after the Affordable Care Act. They immediately withdrew all of the lawsuits on voting rights. So a lot of my friends that are progressive say, well, Obama didn't do anything. And then when Trump got in, they said he's undoing everything Obama did. Well, how do you undo nothing? So clearly, Obama did something, otherwise Trump wouldn't be undoing it. Now, did he do everything we wanted? No. And in many of the meetings and conferences we had, we would, you know, be pounding, we want you to do more. But he did get a lot done, and he fought every step of the way. They held the Attorney General, give you a good example. They held Eric Holder in contempt of Congress. We're sitting up here wondering whether this Attorney General is even going to come and appear in Congress about crimes that they were investigating. I mean, it's almost like people forgot. They held Eric Holder in contempt, and they're saying, well, we'll negotiate with William Barr whether they'll come on whether or not they obstructed justice, when the special counsel that they appointed said, here are 10 areas you can find obstructions if you're so willing. So I think that if you just look at the contrast, you see what Barack Obama did. Now, does that mean that I was not one of them that had access to him, that was always on him to do more? Absolutely. But that does not mean I don't give him credit for what he did get done.
So just picking up on that, what are some specific things you think President Obama could have done better during his presidency?
I mean, I would have been more aggressive in certain areas of policing. I think that there were some federal cases, and this, Obama couldn't call the shot, in all fairness, the Attorney General. There's no reason to me there was not a federal civil rights case against the policeman that choked Eric Garner to death. I would have brought a federal case there. The evidence was there. You don't try a case in a grand jury. You see if there is enough evidence to go to trial. You have a tape with a man choking a man dies. If that is not enough to go to trial. So I think in areas of policing, I would have gone. And I would have certainly dealt more in terms of trying to hold those states that were not dealing fairly in terms of the educational resources. Well, I would have taken the educational money. I would have said that if you're not going to do ABC with public education, then we're going to take your federal aid to education, which no state could survive. So those were areas. But again, a lot of that was his administration, where we were trying to push him to push his cabinet members a little stronger. But overall, I think that, you know, like I said, I started when I was 13. I've dealt directly with about 4 presidents. He was by far the best.
Interesting.
And the 4 I dealt with. Now, I admit the 4 I had was a bad group.
Yeah, because compared to like George W. Bush, you couldn't really get a meeting with.
Well, I mean, George W. Bush, we met with, but we didn't get anything. I mean, we didn't meet as much as Obama. But when you compare Obama, who did deal with issues like Trayvon and did deal with issues like health care, with a George Bush who for 4 days didn't know that there was a Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans. He didn't do anything 4 days. He didn't know it, even though it was on every television station 24 hours a day. He missed it. But he did see some weapons in Iraq that was never there.
Yeah. Clear sight. Let's go over to you guys. The woman in the back there. Middle, thanks.
Hi, so I just wanted to ask, what have you found to be the most effective way to get through to people with the power to make change about issues of race without just coming across as another black person making a lot of noise about black people?
I think I might be the last person in America you could ask that, because but I think that, one, you've got to go in to activism with the understanding and the resolve that you're not going to get everybody. This is not a line of work that you're going to be popular, ever. You understand that there is going to always be people that will dismiss you, deride you, and distort you, which is why only those that are true believers should become activists. Now, those that want to persuade people and want people to like them should be politicians. But if you're going to be activists, you should make up your mind that I'm going against the grain, and it's going to make people uncomfortable. And when people are uncomfortable, they're going to react. So, you know, now you get a lot of people that are with you, and you always got to remind yourself, and there's just as many or more against you. So I'll go to Heathrow tomorrow to go back to the States, and there'll be some people that say, could I have a selfie, and the other will be saying that goddamn Al Sharpton. And you just know that. You don't get too high in that. And I think you're never going to quiet the critics. What you want is to be able to, in many ways, inspire those that lean your way to become more active and to become more involved, and to don't just look at you because you're going to make mistakes, but look at doing it their way. I think that far too many of us that have gotten into positions of high profile want mimics and mentees rather than just let people do it their way. Your job is to get them to just wake up and be active and do it their way, not to imitate you.
But speaking of like styles of activism, you very much softened your approach, I think, compared to the 90s, kind of one might say in the public eye.
I don't think that I've softened as much as society has moved more. The things that I brought up in the 90s were not as accepted by the public as they are now. So when in the 90s we'd say police are killing us, people say they're exaggerating, they're lying. Well, after seeing videotapes of Aragon and others, they can't dismiss it as much. And so I think that that's one thing. The other thing is, I always laugh when I read these profiles saying Sharpton used to wear track suits and medallions, now he wears a suit and tie. I dressed the style. When I wore a track suit and medallion, it was cause, like I said, Spike and all of us, we were in our 20s, that was the I think I'd look foolish coming in here tonight with bell-bottom pants and platform shoes. There's not the style anymore. Yeah. So it's a matter of just you grow with the style. I didn't sit somewhere and calculate, I'm going to put the tracksuit down and I'm going to buy a suit and tie. you dress according to the style. Yeah. You won't be dressing the way you are tonight in 20 or 30 years. So I think that's it. I think the cynical calculations is laughable to me.
Fair. Anyone else? You in the front?
Thanks. Now, there's still some overt racism in the UK and the US, but a lot of it has become covert, sort of subtle. How do you think people of color in both countries should organize to sort of combat that and to make sure that we're working on a united front on that issue?
Very, very good. I think that one of the things that we had to do is that you have to be able to remove the veil off of the covert racism. So I'll give you an example. Dr. King's movement, which I'm a child of, was Southern-based. The name of his organization was Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Well, I grew up in the North. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. I never sat in the back of the bus, never couldn't check in a hotel. But it was covert racism. You knew you couldn't go in certain neighborhoods, you couldn't get certain jobs, you couldn't get a bank loan, you couldn't get a business loan. 1986 happens, and a young man named Michael Griffith was killed in a part of New York called Howard Beach for being in the neighborhood. The car broke down, him and two friends walked to try to get help. People said, you know, why are you niggas in the neighborhood? Chased him, got killed. Mother called me, I'm a young activist at the time, and we said, how do we make the message real that you have segregation in New York? Because everybody saw it as a Southern problem. And I said, I tell you what, why don't we have a motorcade in the Howard Beach and get 100 cars to drive to Howard Beach, blacks, have a rally, and show people there are no blacks out here. And people said, oh, that's risky. We argued, but I won. Only problem I had is we won a 100-car motorcade, and I didn't even have a car then. I was on the subway. So I borrowed somebody's car. We had this motorcade. When we got out there, maybe 100 of us, 300 whites was out there yelling, niggas go home. So we were able, they ripped the veil off themselves. 1991, young man in this country killed named Roland Adams. His parents called me, I came out, we let him march. They had guys in London coming off the side of the street, waving a banana in our face, saying, monkeys, go home. You lift the veil. Sometimes you must use dramatic ways to make people tell on themselves. And I think that part of activism is to expose a problem before it can be solved, which is why I was saying to her, you're going to be disliked because it makes people uncomfortable, because people are going to say, why are they doing that? They're meddling with a problem, because no one will see a problem unless you put it front and center. And I think that it has to be made very public. I think that without that, they're going to just go along to get along. Like in about a month, Donald Trump is coming to do a state visit to Great Britain. And I think how the reaction to him coming, not that I would ever encourage you all to go to all the demonstrations against him en masse, and if you need any help, we'll help you. I would never suggest that. But I think that mass movement, mass drama is the way you have to lift the veil off, because they're very comfortable in keeping it covert.
In the middle, in the back.
Hi, thank you for being here. Do you think that Americans would vote for another black president in our lifetimes?
Well, I think that, one, the reason I'm being hesitant is I didn't know that they would vote for the one they did. I think you have two good candidates now, in Cory Booker and Kamala Harris. Will they win? I don't know. I think that the cynical side of me says that some Americans have said, we've been there, done that, check that box. And I would hope that they vote for the best candidate, be they black or white. When I look at our convention, Stacey Abrams, I mean, who is better on the public platform now than Stacey Abrams is? So I think that it is possible. And I would hope that we've gotten by that. But in American history, since you said America, every time there's been a step forward, there's been a backlash back. That's been the pattern. So I had David Blight, who wrote an excellent book on Frederick Douglass. I just had him at our convention. And when I read his book of how Douglass and the abolitionists pushed Lincoln to where Lincoln finally had the slaves join the Union Army, because Lincoln was not this, he gets credit for the great liberator, great emancipator. He came kicking and screaming. And in fact, he only put blacks in the Union Army because the Union was losing. And his generals said that if we don't let some of the blacks help us fight, we're going to be defeated. The Confederates had gotten as far as Richmond, Virginia. They're at your back door, headed into Washington. So he freed only the slaves in the southern states, joined the Union Army, and they helped win. So in many ways, when people talk about when I was a kid, Lincoln freed the slaves freed Lincoln, because he'd have lost the Union if it hadn't been for that. So what I'm saying is that I think that in many ways, we are looking at a country that when you look at the tax bills, the climate change denial, and the collusion and others that Donald Trump is doing, they're going to look for leadership. And I think that they, I would hope, are not going to say, but we don't need another black. I think that they're going to say we need to get out of this. Whether they will or not, I don't know. But I'm not surprised after 8 years of a black president, there wouldn't be a backlash. When you look at the demographics now, it just came out that in 10 years, there'll be more people of color than whites under 18 in the United States, and then by 45, it'll be a majority-minority country. Well, demagogues like Trump play on that. It's us against them. We're losing it. It's not going to be a white country anymore, and people panic. And I think that that's exploited. And the question is how we're able to relieve that panic strategically and at the same time deliver what people want. I think the answer is going to have to be that.
Interesting. Thank you. You up front again? roughly the same.
Hiya. So we've talked about the importance of, with social movements, not just building something small and then having a rally, having a press conference, and then going home, and actually kind of building something substantial and effective. And one form, both in the US and the UK, of kind of growing grassroots social movement at the moment are those dealing with environmental issues. And you think about the school strikes, for example, and Obama's highlighting of that in the US just last week. I wondered if you had any thoughts in terms of the extent to which these campaigns can be sustained, you know, in their kind of current forms and optics, perhaps especially given in the UK with Extinction Rebellion, they've been through quite a lot of criticism from activists given lack of racial diversity and how that feeds into some of their campaigning methods.
I think that one of the things is that we must talk to people in a language that they understand and their predicament. I think that you're absolutely right. A lot of the environmental movement has not seen a lot of diversity, but a lot of it is that I don't think that it has been translated to people of color how they are, even in that area, disproportionately suffering. If you look at the United States, most of the places that they're dumping a lot of the toxics disproportionately is in our communities. But if you have people that don't know how to relate that, don't know how to communicate that, we're not part of that movement. And then yet we're the ones that should be there in larger numbers. And you've got to accept leadership from those areas. So I think that there must be a aggressive and intentional way of it. It's not, diversity doesn't fall out of the sky. You've got to go and reach out and you've got to say, look, we all need to do this and you have a vested interest for these reasons. Again, going back to my childhood, when Dr. King came out against the war in Vietnam, he was condemned by the NAACP, Urban League and others, because people were saying, what are we dealing with the war? We're in the civil rights. And he said, that is civil rights. We're dying disproportionately in Vietnam. They're taking our resources. And he was blasted. I'm not talking about just by Johnson and the warmongers, by his own allies in civil rights, which is why I say you have to have the risk, the factor that you will go where it's not comfortable and where you're probably going to be condemned. But I think that you've got to build structures that are not strangling innovation, but that allows innovation, but that will also reach out and bring in more people. And I think diversity is important.
So who do you think should be the first mover on that? Should environmental movements kind of try to be more diverse, or should civil rights organizations try to be more environmentally focused?
I think they should meet halfway.
Yeah.
I think that environmentalists should not only be more diverse, they ought to go into diverse communities and start really talking on the streets and the meetings and the churches, whatever the gathering places of people, about the impact, the environmental impact in Brixton as opposed to other places, and really make people understand this is their issue. And I think civil rights groups need to start dealing with the civil rights violation of that. I think it's both.
Yeah, understand. You in the front row here?
Hi.
Hi.
Talking of civil rights themes, which has obviously kind of dominated most of your kind of time here, I'm just wondering if you have any comment on the recent scandal at Harvard. When I first looked at this, I thought, well, maybe it could just be another misunderstanding, but then I looked at the details more, and it's actually quite frightening. So obviously, with a lot of American universities, they don't just kind of take you in based on merit, they take you in based on kind of other mitigating factors, such as maybe your race or your kind of how much wealth you have, whether you're a first generation kind of student or anything else, or whether you're even a legacy student or anything. But the statistics have shown that there's even though there's lots of Chinese students who are applying to Harvard and are capable of getting in, it's not disproportionate to the number who should get in. And they're often, I think they do have 3 standards for letting students in. It's merit, and then extracurricular activities, and then your personality. And often, just based on that race alone, Chinese students, before they're even met for interviews and things, are often downgraded for their personality before they even kind of get to actually meet the admissions processes. This seems to me like an incredibly racist system at Harvard. I wouldn't like it if it was enacted against black people, people of Hispanic heritage, or like Chinese people. Do you have any comment on that particular racist incident?
There's a lot of complexities in what several of the issues at Harvard, including Harvard using an ex-slave's picture. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on. In terms of what you raise about the test and the personality as an eliminating factor for Asians, I think it's something that is absolutely, I mean, it's blatantly wrong. And I think that, again, going back to his point, that there needs to be more reaching out. A guy would ask me in Boston about that, and he says, why aren't you involved? I said, because no one has really reached out to us to ask us that. You run into two problems. I've never got in any case or situation that the people involved didn't ask us to. Because at one level, if you get involved without them asking, they go, oh, they're publicity seeking, here they come. If they ask, then you can respond. And I think that the whole question just around that part of the personality part of the three questions, and they use that prematurely against the Asians. Asians communities need to reach out to other than Asians to be part of raising that issue. And I think that that is a legitimate issue because it could happen. And in other areas has happened to blacks and Latinos. And we've got to fight for more than our silo, which is why I brought up about why it was important to me to bring Buttigieg to Harlem to stand up for against what Franklin Graham said about LGBTQ. I'm not gay. So I think that you need others than those in a designated area to say this is wrong. And I think that if we only fight for our silo, it weakens the fight.
We're just touching on affirmative action. So if you discriminate in favor of some groups, like African Americans in the United States, doesn't that necessarily mean you have to discriminate against other people, like Asian Americans, like white Americans, on the basis of their race? But
see, I think that when you are raising the issue of affirmative action, it is not discriminating against other groups. You are dealing with the fact that you have to undo the discrimination done to groups. So people will say, well, why do we have to have this? Because you did it. America, I said to the student reporters upstairs, what was done to blacks and women and others was law. It wasn't like somebody had a custom. It was the law. That's why Rosa Parks was arrested for sitting in the front of the bus. She didn't break a Southern custom. She broke the law. Blacks couldn't go to schools by law. So in order to make those schools equal, they had to have a program that says, you've got to show us you've got a certain amount of blacks, you've got to show us you've got a certain amount of this, because you've got to pay for the exclusion that you had as a matter of record for all those years. That's not discriminating against somebody, that's repairing the damage you did. And I think, and it was a conservative remedy. What a lot of people don't understand, affirmative action was written by a man named Arthur Fletcher, who was Undersecretary of Labor under Richard Nixon. Nixon administration started affirmative action. Very conservative. And unless you have goals set to repair damage you did, you're never going to be able to repair the damage.
You over there?
Good evening, Reverend. I have a question about some of the criticism that has been leveled against you by your detractors with regards to the events that took place in Crown Heights in 1991.
91.
I beg your pardon?
Crown Heights was 91.
91. Well, some of the critics have noted that the charged rhetoric that you employed around the time of the riots that took place that disproportionately targeted Jews in that part of New York City caused harm to your reputation in their eyes. Looking back at that particular juncture, would you have done anything differently? And if so, what would you have done differently?
I'm glad you raised it, because I think that when I challenge my critics about Crown Heights, they cannot tell me what they're talking about. The criticism is that there were riots in Crown Heights for 2 or 3 days, and that I inflamed it with rhetoric. Well, I wasn't even there. When the first night happened, a 7-year-old boy named Gavin Cato and his cousin was playing in front of their house. A rabbi was riding through, something happened with the car, and the car went on the curb, killed a little boy, young girl was injured. That night, because the ambulance came, took the rabbi, the city ambulance came a few minutes later and took the boy. People said, why didn't the first ambulance take it? They rioted. I was living in New Jersey. I didn't even know it was a riot. In that riot, Yankel Rosenbaum, a young man, Jewish Hasidic scholar, was killed. I didn't know anything about any of it. The next day, the young boy, 7-year-old boy's father, called me and asked me would I come out and help be a spokesperson for his family. I said I would. I saw it on the news late that night about the riot. Now you got to remember now, the 7-year-old boy and Rosenbaum were already dead. I went out, went to the hospital with him to see the 7-year-old, his niece. Came back to the house, they were rioting again in the streets. Mayor Dinkins, the black mayor, was the mayor. I then went out the third day with others trying to tell people, yeah, we need to have an explanation why the ambulance didn't pick him up, but we need to do it nonviolently, and we started to try to organize nonviolent marches. And I preached the funeral of the 7-year-old kid. So the misnomer that we said something that inflamed and started riots is patently untrue, because the riots happened before we even got the call and stopped once we got there. Now, if saying that we wanted to know what happened to the car, where's the driver, why one ambulance didn't take the kid is inflaming tensions, then I don't agree with that. If saying that we should have reached out for more dialogue, I agree with that. I think we could have been more reaching out, more explaining to them, wait a minute, we weren't even here, we don't know what you're talking about. So I think we got defensive, which added to the misinformation. But you have people right now to this day think that I was there the night Rosenbaum was killed and that we were there the nights of the riot. We were not. But I think that our fault was we should have said, wait a minute, let's explain this and let's have a common conversation. The irony of this is that New York State under Governor Mario Cuomo did an intense investigation on the Crown Heights riots, in which they said that they felt the police were held back by the Dinkins administration, the Crown Heights report, you might be familiar. In that same report it said, but Sharpton was not there. So they take the part of the report that condemns Dinkins, but still want to, I guess because I'm still out there visible, condemn us. I think that some Jewish leaders have said, wait a minute, let's be fair here, and have worked with us. I had 1,000 ministers march against Trump about 2 years ago. 300 rabbis came. Rabbis went to jail with us around Diallo. Some have said, let's try to really deal with facts. And I would hope that that happens in Crown Heights. But I think some people, and it happens on the black side. I got some blacks that feel that things happened that whites did that did not happen. I think that we've got to sometimes deal with some hard truths that people that we dislike, we may dislike for misinformation. Doesn't mean we should like them, but at least let's get the information right.
Okay, I think we have time for one last question. So, you in the gallery? There's a microphone up there, I think.
Hi, thank you so much for coming. I was going to ask what you think the role of the church is in US politics as of today and what you predict it being in like the next few decades.
I think that I've been a minister most of my life, and I am a firm believer in my faith. I'm a Baptist minister. But I believe firmly in the separation of church and state. I do not believe that the church should be able to, in any way, make a judgment by law and enforcement whatever we believe to be our religion. A theocracy is certainly anti what I feel we should be striving for. I think the church has a moral commitment, though, to fight for what is right and to stand up and take positions. But I do not think that if I disagree with someone's life choices, that I have the right to make that the law. I have the right to preach it. I have the right to try and convert you, but I don't have the right to force you to live according to my religious beliefs. And I think that I have a real problem with people in the church that want to tell women what to do with their bodies or tell people what their sexual orientation is, but walk by people that are hungry, walk by people that are homeless, or walk by people that are going to schools that are ill-funded, and they don't have a moral outrage with that. And I think that our job is to stand up for what is right and fair, but not try and force people to live, even if they choose that they don't believe in God. It's not our job to make them do something. It's our job to convert them, but to stand up for what is right.
Thank you. Well, thank you.
He's been raising his hand all night. Can
Sure.
you take
Yeah,
him?
sure. Might as well.
Yep. Because he'll end up being the writer that says, and he wouldn't take my question.
Okay, fair enough. He's the boss.
Sorry, I think that was probably a better place to end, but I just had a question with regards to the environment. I totally agreed with what you had to say, and kind of the need to increase the intersectionality with regards to that. And I just wanted to know if you thought that the Green New Deal and the approach taken by AOC was in the right direction, and if that could potentially lead to a transformation on action.
I think so. I think that the Green New Deal, the idea, the concept, and even the particulars, because many people that are criticized that haven't read it, is in the right direction. Now, yeah, we can argue about how much of it you get through, but the fact is that we need a new deal. And she has changed the conversation, even in the Democratic Party. So I think that it is good, which is one of the reasons why whoever raised it, I think he did, that she was at our convention, because I wanted to show we stood with her. And a lot of blacks in Congress are uncomfortable with her, and I wanted them to know that we stood with her, and that what she's saying is going to disproportionately help us, because we are the victims there.
Very fair. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.